Somewhere around 70,000 years ago, your ancestors walked out of Africa, and within a few thousand years, their skin started doing something remarkable. Not slowly, fast, geologically, embarrassingly fast. We are talking about a trait, the most visually obvious trait on the human body, that can shift from very dark to very pale in as few as 6 to 10,000 years. For context, 6,000 years ago, the pyramids hadn't been built yet. Your skin color is, by evolutionary standards, an almost recklessly unstable trait. And the reason for that instability tells you something important about what your body is actually trying to do. Let's start at the beginning, before we had any skin color problem at all. Our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, gorillas, have pale skin under their fur. Their pigmentation doesn't need to do much heavy lifting because the fur is doing the UV work. Then, roughly 2 million years ago, something strange happened to the primate line that would eventually become us. We lost the fur. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to matter. And that decision, if evolution gets to make decisions, exposed several square feet of previously sheltered skin directly to equatorial African sun. The UV index at the equator is, for most of the year, catastrophically high. And bare skin without protection degrades rapidly under that kind of radiation. So the body needed a new solution. That solution is melanin. Melanin is a pigment produced by cells called melanocytes, which sit at the base of your epidermis. Interestingly, almost every human on the planet has roughly the same number of melanocytes. What differs is how much melanin those cells produce, and what type. There are two main types, eumelanin, which is dark brown, and pheomelanin, which is red-yellow. Dark skin is high eumelanin. Pale skin is low eumelanin with relatively more pheomelanin. Red hair is pheomelanin running almost completely unchecked. Now, what does eumelanin actually do when UV hits it? It absorbs UV radiation and disperses it as heat before it can damage the DNA inside your skin cells. It is, functionally, a natural sunscreen woven into your own tissue. Dark skin, high eumelanin skin, has a natural SPF of roughly 13 to 15. Pale skin has an SPF of roughly 3. So far, the story seems simple. Equatorial Africa, lots of UV. Dark skin makes sense. Done. Except that is only half the story, and the other half is where things get strange. Because the same UV radiation that damages DNA also does something your body absolutely cannot live without. It synthesizes vitamin D. Vitamin D is not optional. It regulates calcium absorption, immune function, bone density, and a dozen other systems your body relies on every day. Without it, you get rickets as a child and osteomalacia as an adult. Your skeleton softens and bends under your own weight. Your skin makes vitamin D when UVB light hits a precursor molecule in the epidermis and converts it. The whole thing takes about 15 minutes of sun exposure. But melanin, the same pigment that blocks dangerous UV, also blocks the UVB that triggers vitamin D synthesis. Your skin is trying to solve two problems that directly contradict each other. Block UV, absorb UV at the same time. This is the core tension driving the entire distribution of human skin color across the globe. It is a biological arms race between two nutrients. Folate on one side, vitamin D on the other. Folate is a B vitamin. It is critical for DNA repair and for fetal development. UV radiation destroys it in your bloodstream. Low folate in a pregnant woman is one of the leading causes of neural tube defects, spina bifida, and anencephaly, the kind of outcomes that remove you from the gene pool permanently. So near the equator, where UV is intense year-round, the selection pressure toward dark skin, toward folate protection, is enormous. But move north, toward Scandinavia, toward northern Russia, toward the cloudy Atlantic coast of Ireland. At 60 degrees north latitude, the angle of sunlight is so shallow and the sky so frequently overcast that your skin receives a fraction of the UV it would at the equator. The folate threat disappears, but the vitamin D crisis arrives instead. In a low UV environment, dark skin becomes a liability. The same melanin shield that saved your ancestors near the equator now blocks the limited UVB you actually need. Your children have bowed legs. Your bones ache. Your immune system underperforms. You die younger and leave fewer descendants. And so, over generations, pale skin wins in the north. Not because it looks better, because it lets more UVB through. This is the folate vitamin D hypothesis, developed by Nina Jablonski and George Chaplin at Penn State in 2000. It is, to date, the most thoroughly supported single explanation for the global pattern of skin color. And when Jablonski and Chaplin plotted actual UV data from NASA satellites against global skin color data from anthropological records, the correlation was striking. The closer a population lived to the equator, the darker the skin. The further from the equator, the lighter, across every continent, every ocean, every culture. There are exceptions. We will get to those. But first, the mechanism, because how does natural selection actually change skin color so quickly? The answer is a gene, one gene mostly, the melanocortin-1 receptor gene, MC1R. MC1R sits on a receptor in the melanocyte cell surface. It receives a hormonal signal and, based on that signal, tells the cell which type of melanin to produce. Active MC1R means high eumelanin, dark pigment. Inactive MC1R means the cell defaults to pheomelanin, the red-yellow type. Red hair and very pale skin are largely caused by MC1R variants that reduce receptor activity. In humans, MC1R is extraordinarily variable compared to other primates. Chimpanzees have almost no variation in MC1R. Humans have dozens of known variants. This variation is not random noise. The pattern of which variants appear where tracks almost exactly with UV index and latitude. Selection is operating directly on this gene. The environment is, in a very literal sense, rewriting your DNA over generational time. But MC1R is not the whole story. Skin color is what geneticists call a polygenic trait, shaped by multiple genes working together. SLC24A5, SLC45A2, OCA2, HARC2, TYR. Each of these genes has documented variants associated with lighter or darker skin across specific populations. SLC24A5, for example. One single variant of this gene accounts for a significant portion of the skin tone difference between Europeans and West Africans. One letter in 3 billion. One swap in the code. And the cell behaves differently enough to move your skin tone noticeably. Now, let's talk about speed. How fast can selection actually change skin color? Faster than almost any other complex trait. The key evidence came from ancient DNA, not modern populations, actual bones and teeth pulled from archaeological sites across Europe. For most of European prehistory, for tens of thousands of years, the hunter-gatherers who lived there had dark skin. Western hunter-gatherers in Mesolithic Europe, roughly 10,000 years ago, carried the SLC24A5 variant for dark skin. Europe was dark-skinned for most of its human prehistory. The light-skin variants we associate with Europe today arrived and spread, primarily in the last 5 to 8,000 years. 5,000 years, that is roughly 200 generations. In evolutionary terms, that is a sprint. What drove the speed? Farming. When populations shifted to an agricultural diet, grains, less meat, less organ food, dietary vitamin D dropped sharply. The skin had to compensate. Organ meats, fatty fish, and animal products are dietary sources of vitamin D. Bread is not. When you farm grain in a low UV environment and eat less animal fat, your vitamin D supply crashes from 2 directions at once. The skin has to become more transparent to compensate. This double pressure may explain why the lightening was so rapid in early European farmers compared to the hunter-gatherers who preceded them. Now, let's talk about the exceptions, because they are important. And the most striking one is the Inuit. The Inuit and many indigenous Arctic peoples live at very high latitudes with minimal sun exposure for much of the year. By the UV hypothesis, they should have evolved extremely pale skin. They have not. Inuit and related Arctic peoples have medium to moderately dark skin, notably darker than Europeans at the same latitude. The reason is diet. Inuit traditional diets are extraordinarily rich in fatty fish, marine mammals, and organ meat, all extremely high in dietary vitamin D. If you are eating enough vitamin D, your skin does not need to let more UV in to synthesize it. The dietary route bypasses the skin entirely. The Inuit exception is not a contradiction, it is confirmation. The mechanism is vitamin D regulation. The skin is just one way to get it. Another exception worth knowing about: South Asian and Southeast Asian populations often have darker skin than expected for their latitude. Part of the explanation here involves relatively recent migration history and the fact that populations haven't been in their current latitudes long enough for full adaptation to have caught up. Evolutionary adaptation is not instantaneous. There is lag, sometimes thousands of years of lag. This is why you cannot look at any individual human and read their ancestry like a compass. The signal is real. The map is approximate. And here is something that the science makes very clear. The genes associated with light skin in Europeans are not the same as the genes associated with light skin in East Asians. Pale skin evolved independently, multiple times, on separate branches of the human family tree in separate gene pools under separate but analogous pressure. Evolution found the same answer twice. That is not coincidence. That is the environment issuing the same instruction to two different classrooms and getting the same result. This phenomenon is called convergent evolution, and in human skin color, it is a very clear signal about which selective pressures were genuinely powerful. Now, the modern implication. Because all of this ancient calibration was set for a world without sunscreen, glass windows, office jobs, or polar fleece and fluorescent lighting. Your skin color was tuned for a lifestyle spent largely outdoors in your ancestral latitude, eating the foods available in that environment. People with dark skin living at high latitudes are at elevated risk of vitamin D deficiency. The clinical data on this is consistent and robust. People with pale skin living near the equator, without modern sunscreen, face elevated UV damage, accelerated skin aging, and significantly higher skin cancer rates. Your body is running software written for a place you may have never been and a diet you may never eat. This is not a design flaw. Evolution does not design, it responds. And it has not had time to respond to the last few hundred years of global population movement. 500 years of global movement versus millions of years of adaptation. Evolution is, relatively speaking, still processing. This is also why vitamin D supplementation is one of the most frequently recommended interventions for people with dark skin in northern countries. The biology demands it, even if the culture hasn't always made it visible. And this is why skin color, the trait that has been made to carry enormous social weight, is, underneath all of it, a dial. A biological dial set for a specific latitude, diet, and UV environment. It does not measure worth. It measures where your ancestors lived and how much sun they got. The entire range of human skin color, from the deepest brown to the palest pink, falls within a remarkably narrow band of biological variation. Humans are genetically an extraordinarily uniform species. We went through population bottlenecks so severe that all living humans are more closely related than two separate troops of chimpanzees in the same forest. The visual differences between humans are, at the level of the genome, a surface phenomenon. Skin deep, as it happens, in a quite literal sense. The thing you notice first about another person, the first visual data point your ancient pattern recognition system processes, is a trace of UV history. Yours and theirs. Every human you have ever met carries an evolutionary record of their ancestors' relationship to sunlight, written directly in the tissue. You are not looking at race when you look at skin color. You are looking at latitude. You are looking at ancient light. That is the file on human skin color. Folate and vitamin D, UV and latitude. A dial tuned over thousands of years to an address your body may not live at anymore. File closed. If you want the next file, subscribe. There is more where this came from.